This is a production of Cornell University.
Okay. All right, so we've talked about variation in sort of the daytime, the seasonality. We've talked about management issues. Why don't we actually talk about some variations in soil climate based on positions of the world? Okay, in the higher latitudes, mean soil temperatures will shift seasonally, which makes sense. I mean, we have seasons. It's colder, warmer, winter, summer. Okay, and then we'll also have very dramatic diurnal variations superimposed on top of this. Okay, we have longer days in the summertime, shorter days in the winter. Okay, so we're going to have a diurnal effect, not just a temperature effect from our latitude. Okay, the tropics, the sun angle is always pretty high. The day length is always pretty consistent. Okay, as a result, the soil climate is not characterized by heat because of moderation of a lot of things, but also I have a moderation of the day length, but I also have a lot more cloud cover down there. And I also, if you look at the planet and you look at where the tropics are dominated, the whole planet, the tropical zones, the latitudes are dominated by oceans. And the oceans, it takes a lot of energy to heat up water. Once they're heated up, they'll stay hot for a long period of time. But what that's going to do is it's going to moderate the soil climates in these tropical zones. Okay? It's never going to get super hot, the soils, and it's never going to get super cold, because the energy of that system is not going to change as dramatically as it would in the higher latitudes, whether you're in the North America or in northern latitudes or the southern latitudes. Now you also have local variations, and these are sort of, I've been premising these as management, but it depends on the aspect, that slope angle. Remember the surface area being hit by the light, the water content of that soil, as well as the cover. So if I have a bare soil versus a mulch soil versus a plant cover, this line represents the temperature gradients. Okay? And here's the line for the temperature gradient. All right, so let me ask a question. At this point, we should be able to answer. Why do wet soils get less hot than dry soils? Evaporation? Conductivity? High heat specific capacity. It takes more energy to heat them up. When I have a wet system, it's going to evaporate. And wet systems are much better at conducting that heat than a dry system. All of those basically mean that these soils are going to be less variable. Cool? Questions? All right, let's talk about management. Let's get back to management. Okay, management of soil temperature. Now, if you want to talk about management of soil temperature, you're going to basically want to do two things. Well, actually three potentially. One is you're going to want to raise the temperature, or you're going to want to lower the temperature, or you basically want to maintain the temperature. Okay, so maintaining the temperature is basically reducing the amount of energy moving into the system and or making the system more resilient to that energy change, i.e. a wet soil versus a dry soil. Okay, so what do we want to do if we want to raise the temperature? Okay, well, why would we want to do this? Certainly you can think of some spring examples. Okay, the first one right here. In the springtime, I want to raise my soil temperature. So certainly if I'm in agriculture. Why do I want to raise it? Because seed germination, seeds need a certain temperature for them to germinate. Okay, so if I raise the temperature into their germination range, I'll have better germination. Okay, I also may need to have a certain temperature range for the root growth. Certain trees, certain plants will not grow when the soil is too cold. It makes sense to them. Okay, it's just sort of a controller. Okay, so what kind of methods do we have actually to heat up the soil? Well, we can change the specific heat. Okay, or we can change the amount of energy that hits the system. The first one is let's change the amount of energy that hits the system. Let's remove all the cover so we have the maximum amount of sunlight hitting the soil. Does that make sense? Anything that's going to get in the way of that short wavelengths hitting the ground is going to reduce the amount of energy that's hitting the soil. It's going to reduce the amount of heat. Okay, so let's get rid of that stuff. If I can keep my soils dry, I reduce the amount of energy that I actually need to heat things up. Okay, if I have a wet, waterlogged soil, it's going to take a lot longer to heat up than a dry soil. Does that make sense? Okay. I want to mulch it, but I want to use a specific kind of mulch. I want to have a transparent mulch, a mulch that's not going to prevent the long wavelengths from going into the ground, but is going to prevent the short wavelengths from re-radiating. Basically, I want to put a greenhouse in, basically making a pseudo greenhouse effect. Black plastic also, I can also heat up the material by increasing the amount of absorption. If I have a dark soil versus a light soil, if I reduce the amount of albedo, if I suck in more material, and that's the idea of using a black plastic versus a clear plastic. Use a black plastic, more heat, it absorbs more. Okay, granted, I still have to transfer that heat from the mulch to the soil, but if I heat it up enough, I can overcome that conductivity break, that issue with conductivity. Does that make sense? Questions? This is how I want to heat the system up. Okay, what happens though in the middle of the summer? I don't want my soils to be superheated because then I'm going to start stressing my plants and the organisms that are in there. So what kind of stresses or what kind of management things could you actually use to lower the temperature? Any thoughts here? I got some good examples. How about this one? Exposed soils, in parentheses, brief. If I expose my soil, I'm now opening up to direct contact from the radiation, right? So that probably is not a great idea. But if you think about it, you can think about when the radiation is at its smallest and re-radiation is at its most. If I was going to do this exposed soil, when would I want to do it? Somebody said it. At nighttime. Make sense? Okay, how about some other type of strategies? I mean, we can certainly do this with greenhouse pots. I mean, it's probably a lot harder to do if you've got a whole cornfield. Okay, how about some other ideas? This is the classic greenhouse one, but we use a shading device. Okay, but there's a lot of different types of shading devices out there. Okay, when we say shading device, most people think of like an umbrella or cover or something like that. But how about a vegetative cover? I start getting biomass above my soil. That starts interfering with the radiation coming into my soil, and I'm reducing the amount of heating of my soil. Make sense? Okay, how about mulching with straw? Putting a mulch out there. Yes, I showed mulch in the cold system, but this mulch would invert this line in the warm system. Does anybody have a garden that they mulch? Okay, how often do you mulch? And when do you mulch? You mulch in the spring? When do you mulch?
Mostly in the autumn and then some in the spring.
Sometimes in the autumn, sometimes in the spring. What do you guys do in the summertime? Do you leave the mulch on, take it off? What do you do? A lot of people do it in late June, late spring. They mulch and then they pull it off for a period in the fall and then they mulch it again. Does this sound familiar to anybody? Okay, let's think about this. Okay, springtime hits. What do I want my soils to do? I want them to dry and I want them to warm up. Okay, is that the time to have mulch on my soils? No. Okay, once they dry and start warming up, okay, and I've got the soils up to heat, is that the time to put mulch on? Okay, so late spring, early summer. Okay, summertime rolls in, it gets really hot. Okay, you want the mulch in there because it's climate control. It's not just temperature, it also modifies moisture. It holds more moisture when you have mulch in there. Okay, but late summer, early fall. Okay, start thinking about what's going on now. Okay, certainly when I have tender plants or plants that are going to die off, I don't have to worry about it too much. On the other hand, let's think about what happens often in the fall around, and certainly around here. We have Indian summers. okay, where the climate gets really cold, and then for a couple weeks we'll have summer again. Okay, we had March, 84 degrees in March. What was the last? It's crazy. Okay, what should we do? When the system starts getting cold and your plant starts senescing, it actually makes sense to take the mulch off. Let the soils get cold. Send the message to the plants that winter is coming. Start shutting down, storing up for the wintertime. Okay? Once the plants shut down, what should you do? Put the mulch back on. Why? If I don't, Indian summer hits, those soils start heating up. It tricks the plants into thinking that summer's coming. When in reality, in 2 weeks, they're about to get, I want to say toasted, but that's not exact. They're about to get frozen. Now, if I let them cool down, and then I put the mulch back on, when I get that Indian summer, that mulch is going to actually keep the soil cool. And the plants won't be fooled into thinking summer's coming. Does that make sense? Okay, then the middle of the wintertime, or the end of the wintertime, beginning of spring, what do I want to do? I want to heat my soils up again, so that's when I take my mulch off. Okay, get the soils drier, get the soils warm, and then I put the mulch back on when I got them to the temperature I want. Does that make sense?
This has been a production of Cornell University, on the web at cornell.edu.